key vote. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh faces a crucial moment as a Senate panel decides whether to move his nomination forward. White House reaction: what President Trump is saying about his choice for the nation's highest court. Challenging the Vatican: a former Holy See diplomat who says Pope Francis covered up abuse speaks out again. And fostering the arts: the Holy Father on beauty and how it unites the faithful to the Almighty. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, September 28, 2018.
I think it would be proper to delay the floor vote for up to but not more than 1 week.
The Senate Judiciary Committee advances Brett Kavanaugh's nomination for the Supreme Court, but his confirmation is anything but certain after renewed calls for an FBI investigation into allegations of sexual assault. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The committee vote took place 1 day after emotional testimony from Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Ford accuses Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her in high school. Capitol Hill correspondent Ytsync-en was inside. He joins us now with the details. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Today, Kavanaugh won the support of a key Republican, Jeff Flake of Arizona. But Flake's calling for a 1-week investigation into the allegations. And now we know Senate leadership has agreed to postpone the final vote for that probe. And late this afternoon, Kavanaugh friend Mark Judge says he'll work with investigators as long as it's confidential. And here on Capitol Hill, Democrats are trying to keep Kavanaugh off the bench.
What you are doing is allowing someone who actually violated a woman to sit in the Supreme Court.
Emotional overload.
It's time to end the circus.
Morning. Mr. Lee.
Hi.
As senators take part in a key vote on the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. Democrats asked for a delay.
If we want to show Dr. Ford respect, we give her the respect of having her case heard and the evidence looked at. I look at it as, what are you hiding?
Some Democrats walked out in protest, calling the allegations against Kavanaugh disturbing and credible.
Every one of us who's been a prosecutor has seen how hard it is sometimes for victims to come forth. And are we sending the signal that you stay there, don't come forth?
Republicans defended Kavanaugh.
This has never been about the truth. This has been about delay and destruction. And if we reward this, it is the end of good people wanting to be judges.
Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat from Connecticut, blamed his no vote on his belief Kavanaugh is pro-life.
I made no secret of my opposition to him based on his out-of-the-mainstream views and judicial philosophy, his apparent goal to chip away, if not overturn, Roe v. Wade.
The nomination now heads to the full Senate for debate and vote. Now, with a 51-49 majority, Senate Republicans have little room for mistakes. We've got our eyes on several GOP senators who will really decide the fate for Kavanaugh. That's Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and Jeff Flake. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. President Trump says he found Christine Blasey Ford a very credible witness, but he's standing by Judge Kavanaugh and says he's not considering a replacement. White House correspondent Mark Irons continues our team coverage. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump is placing faith in senators, but now that the GOP has decided on a 1-week delay in the nomination vote, it's the president who will have to sign off on an FBI investigation.
I'm going to rely on all of the people, including Senator Grassley, who's doing a very good job. That'll be a decision that they're going to make, and I suspect they'll be making some decision soon, whether to take a vote or to do whatever else they want to do. I will be totally reliant on what Senator Grassley and the group decides to do.
The president canceled a meeting with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein yesterday to watch Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford's testimony. Today, he shared his impressions.
I thought her testimony was very compelling, and she looks like a very fine woman to me. Very fine woman. And I thought that Brett's testimony likewise was really something that I haven't seen before. It was incredible. It was an incredible moment, I think, in the history of our country.
Even some Republican senators have been on the fence about Kavanaugh's nomination. President Trump was asked if he had a message for them. He said, no, they have to do what they think is right. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Pope Francis defrocks the priest at the center of Chile's sex abuse scandal. Father Fernando Caradima was sentenced by the Vatican in 2011 to a life of prayer and penance. The 88-year-old sexually abused minors in the Santiago parish he ran. Chilean abuse survivors applaud the move. A Vatican official says the stiffer penalty is related to the worldwide abuse scandal.
Fernando Caradima's dismissal from the clerical state, his defrocking, is one more step in the Pope's actions against abuse. Really, these were very horrendous crimes, and the rot had to be rooted out.
Greg Burke says Caradima did an exceptional amount of damage to many people in Chile. Cardinal Donald Worrell, the embattled leader of the Archdiocese of Washington, is visiting Rome. Today, Worrell attended a meeting of the Pope's Council for Christian Unity. The 77-year-old is expected to ask Pope Francis to accept his resignation. Worrell is under fire for his handling of sex abuse cases as Bishop of Pittsburgh and as Archbishop of Washington. A former Vatican ambassador who has accused Pope Francis of covering up for a disgraced American ex-cardinal is challenging the Vatican once again. Archbishop Carlo Vigano has written a new letter a month after his initial 11-page document sent shockwaves throughout the Catholic Church. It was released yesterday. Vigano is the former Vatican ambassador to the United States. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, tell us what Vigano is saying.
Wyatt, Vigano accuses Pope Francis of mounting a campaign of, quote, subtle slander. The Archbishop also denounces the official Vatican silence about his claims. And he urges Cardinal Mark Welle, the current head of the Vatican Bishop's office, to speak out. Vigano says Welle has all the documentation needed to prove years of cover-up by the Vatican about alleged sexual misconduct by ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Now, in this new letter, Archbishop Vigano is saying that the Pope's unwillingness to respond to his charges and his appeals by the faithful for accountability are not consistent with Pope Francis's calls for transparency and for bridge building, Wyatt.
Archbishop Vigano's original letter last month sent the Holy Father's papacy into turmoil. Remind us what his accusations are.
Vigano accused Francis of rehabilitating Theodore McCarrick from sanctions imposed by Pope Benedict. And in that bombshell letter, he also accused more than 24 current and former Vatican officials, Wyatt, as well as a host of U.S. bishops and papal advisors, of being part of the cover-up. Vigano called on Pope Francis to resign over the scandal. Francis removed McCarrick as a cardinal in July after a church investigation determined an allegation of abuse of a teenager was credible. Now, after that, several former seminarians and priests came forward to report that they too had been abused or harassed by McCarrick as adults, and the scandal has led to a crisis in confidence in both the U.S. and Vatican hierarchies, since McCarrick's penchant for seminarians was apparently an open secret in some circles. The Archdiocese of Washington announced today that McCarrick, who's 88 years old, now lives at a Capuchin friary in Victoria, Kansas. The revelation ends months of mystery, Wyatt, about his whereabouts.
Well, Archbishop Vigano, on the other side here, has many critics who question his claims and say he provides no evidence. Isn't that right?
That's right, Wyatt. Now, in his original letter, Vigano claimed that Benedict had imposed sanctions against McCarrick, barring him from exercising public ministry, traveling, or lecturing, but it's not clear if any type of sanctions were ever imposed. Now, Vigano's main claim is that he told Francis of the sanctions back in June 2013, and that the Pope effectively rehabilitated McCarrick and made him a trusted advisor. Now, Pope Francis has so far refused to respond to Vigano's claims, but Francis has referred to the issue indirectly, Wyatt, in his morning homilies, speaking of the silence of Jesus before the great accuser, and it seems the Pope is comparing his own silence to that of Christ and Vigano's accusations to the work of the devil. Francis also refused to take questions about Vigano's accusations, as you'll remember, Wyatt, during his in-flight press conference returning from the Baltics on Tuesday evening.
We'll continue to follow the developments as a result of this new letter from Archbishop Vigano as well. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Archbishop Leo Cushley of Edinburgh, Scotland, says silence from the Vatican is not the right approach, but he's hopeful answers are coming.
I also understand from my meetings yesterday with one or two people, I understand that the Holy See does intend to make some kind of statement. Perhaps it could be characterized as a reply. And so I, for one, am waiting to see what the Holy See does have to say in this regard.
Cushley met Pope Francis yesterday and says the Holy Father expressed his concern. At least one person is dead after a 7.5 magnitude earthquake rocks an island in Indonesia, triggering a tsunami. The disasters left scores of people injured and swept away houses in at least 2 cities. Officials are urging residents to stay outdoors because of the threat of dangerous aftershocks from the quake. Pakistan's army chief approves the death sentences for 11 Taliban fighters. They're being called hardcore terrorists who are responsible for the dozens of deaths. The country lifted its ban on capital punishment after a 2014 attack killed more than 150 people, most of them school children. Activists say Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has admitted to illegal killings in his war on drugs.
Ang kasalanan ko lang yung mga extrajudicial killing.
Duterte was speaking yesterday to a group of government executives. His aides say it's a misunderstanding, and the leader repeatedly has denied allowing murder in his crackdown on drugs. Police say nearly 5,000 suspects have been killed in the campaign since Duterte took office. There's a lot more on the newscast tonight. Coming up, more analysis on the Kavanaugh nomination and the impact of Senator Jeff Flake's demand for an FBI investigation into the judge. Plus, a look at the spending bill the president signed today and why pro-lifers are not happy. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. It's been a remarkably busy and sometimes confusing couple of days on Capitol Hill. Yesterday came the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford and Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. As you heard earlier in the show, today there was a vote and now possible delay in the confirmation process. Joining me now to help explain it all is Kevin Daly, Supreme Court reporter for the Daily Caller. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you. My pleasure.
What is the impact of this move today by Senator Jeff Flake to vote to move forward here, but still wants this FBI investigation to take a week?
So things are really in flux at the moment. We don't really have a sense of what the landscape looks like. We do know that this morning, after committing to supporting Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, Senator Flake retreated into an anteroom off of the hearing chamber with a number of Democratic lawmakers, wasn't seen for over an hour, and when those lawmakers emerged, they announced they had reached a gentleman's agreement by which Senator Flake would vote to forward Judge Kavanaugh's nomination out of the Judiciary Committee, provided that the FBI, for no more than a week, investigated the claims that Dr. Blasey Ford has brought. Now, it's important to emphasize that this is just an informal agreement. That cannot take place, that can't move forward without the support of Mitch McConnell and the White House. But in the last hour, key lawmakers have indicated that they support this arrangement. So it looks like a vote on Judge Kavanaugh is going to be delayed for at least another week in the wake of an FBI probe.
Okay, so then how does this prolonged vote, does it help or hurt Kavanaugh's chances?
You know, that's a really interesting question. So a week is a century in politics. And Judge Kavanaugh is exposed and vulnerable to further allegations. I mean, look what's happened just in the last 10 days since Dr. Blasey Ford's allegations surfaced. There have been some credible allegations brought forward about past misconduct and, a lot of highly dubious stuff that's emerged from less reputable quarters. On the other hand, this will keep Republican voters, I think, very angry just before the midterm election. And it also will essentially strip Democrats of their primary talking point. Throughout this process, they've been talking about the necessity of an FBI investigation, and now they will not have that argument to fall back on. And perhaps most importantly, provided that the FBI does not turn up serious evidence of wrongdoing on his part, it's very difficult to see key swing voters like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Jeff Manchin voting against him.
Let's go a little bit deeper into that when it comes to those key votes and those, because what do you think this signals to you about what they could potentially do, or an involvement with them in some way, do you think, between Flake and those senators?
So it seems that Flake was in communication, at least with a couple of those lawmakers before he struck that deal with Democrats. We don't exactly know the particulars of when those communications took place or the content of them. We do know that once Senator Flake in the committee endorsed an FBI investigation, that Lisa Murkowski and Joe Manchin made public statements to the effect that they supported it.
Well, as you know, President Trump has been watching all of this, telling reporters he'll let the Senate handle it. But how realistically do we think the White House is involved in all this, at least talking with senators?
Well, the White House is going to have to be substantially involved to the extent that the Senate has no power to order an executive branch agency like the FBI to conduct an investigation. That order can only come from the White House. So President Trump is the one who's going to have to give this order. That said, the president has shown a lot of deference to Mitch McConnell and Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, throughout this process. So I think that if Mitch McConnell advises the president to order this FBI investigation, the White House will fully cooperate.
Okay, well, like I said, so far it's been a confusing last couple of days, so we appreciate your coming in and laying it all out for us. Kevin Daly, we appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Today, President Trump signed a wide-ranging spending bill that includes funding for America's largest abortion provider, Planned Parenthood. The bill also includes billions of dollars for defense, education, and labor. There's plenty to come on EWTN News Nightly. Up next, a policy expert tells us a way to spot and stop human trafficking. Plus, the Holy Father delivers a message about faith and art. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Catholics joined other faith groups at the United Nations this week to highlight the plight of migrants and refugees. They're calling on nations and individuals to welcome the stranger. Catholic Relief Services hosted a panel discussion this week on how governments can best work with church and other faith-based groups to do that. They're voicing support for the Global Compact on Refugees, which says it's everyone's responsibility to protect those who flee violence and support countries that shelter them.
I think sometimes we separate religion from culture and the life of a person. And in many of the countries in which we work, religion is integrated in who they are, how they work, and their culture. And so as faith-based organizations, when we go out, our first mode of operation is to assist people not to have to migrate.
Adding their support to the Global Compact include a number of international nonprofits and faith-based groups like Islamic Relief Worldwide and Jesuit Refugee Service. Business magazine Barron's reports a new commission is looking at the financial footprint left by human trafficking. It's estimated to have been worth $150 billion in 2016. Earlier this week, Lauren Ashburn spoke with a Dr. Sandra Morgan of the Global Center for Women and Justice about the warning signs of modern-day slavery and ways to stop it.
I believe the first place we begin is educating people in our own backyard. Education, Nelson Mandela said, education is our greatest weapon. And that's what we are committed to at the Global Center for Women and Justice. We want people to understand this happens in their own backyard and that they can actually do something to stop it.
Let's talk about that. How do you recognize whether or not someone is being trafficked?
A lot of it depends on where you are and whether the purpose is for commercial sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, or for labor trafficking. But a common denominator is that someone is controlling the victim through fear, force, fraud, coercion, debt bondage. And many times the victims are the most vulnerable people in our community. And if we gave them options, if we created opportunities for them, we could intervene before they become victims.
This year's State Department report on trafficking highlighted the critical work of local communities to stop those traffickers and provide support to victims. What are you doing there in California?
We are using our online platform to have an online anti-human trafficking certificate that's college-level credit for anyone in a frontline service provider role, EMTs, firemen, law enforcement, social workers. For everyday people, we have an e-book on the critical things you need to know, and I love it when you get online and subscribe to endinghumantrafficking.org.
I witnessed firsthand when I was in Mexico earlier this year the vulnerability of asylum seekers and what they face in terms of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So for those who are actually seeking asylum on the border, what are your recommendations?
Well, first of all, the people around them need to understand their vulnerability. I spent several weeks over the last 2 years in Greece, where you've seen the horrific pictures in the news of refugees who are desperate to escape conflict and war, and then they arrive and they have no option. So someone has to help them to not be so eager to take that job or to allow their teenager to go with someone they don't know. They need to learn how to vet those opportunities, and there are people in place to help them do that. And the other thing, right here in the U.S., we need to take advantage of our national human trafficking hotline. If you're talking to someone, perhaps an asylum seeker, perhaps someone who got into a job and now they can't get out, you can call that hotline, 888-3737-888.
Dr. Sandra Morgan, Director of the Global Center for Women and Justice at Vanguard University, thank you for joining us.
And our thanks to Lauren Ashburn for that interview. And finally tonight, Pope Francis says we can find harmony and peace through art. He was speaking to patrons of the arts at the Vatican museums. The group supports the conservation of the Holy See's collections. Francis thanked them for their help in restoring numerous treasures. He says life and art are the two best ways to bear witness to the Lord. And a very positive note to keep in mind after a contentious week here in Washington. Harmony and peace sound pretty good. And on that note, we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.